1, 0. We have commit and we have liftoff at 2:13. 5 million pounds of thrust, and it has cleared the tower.
Prepare yourself for a world of This is
Welcome all, everybody. Conley here with the Science Nights, and we have a very special show today for you. We have in the studio Dr. Thomas Schiller, and all the way from down under, Dr. Sean Graham. Now, Dr. Sean Graham, depending on how you look at the map and depending on your point of view, y'all could be on top of us, right?
Depending on the way you look at it. Yeah, it's all about your point of view.
Well, we're going to be talking a lot about points of view today because...
From my point of view, I'm on top of you guys.
Well, there we go. But we're going to be talking about points of view in that we're going to be talking about gender and transgender and hermaphrodites and like all the cool things that make this world unique, right?
That's right. We're going to talk about some kind of biological curiosities when it comes to sex. I guess that's a good way to put it.
One of the biggest questions that we had was geckos and them like basically forcing the male species out. Boom. Gone. Now they're all female.
Yeah.
On the couch.
They're on the couch.
What you're talking about, and this is a really cool example because everyone in Alpine and many other people throughout Texas have seen these geckos. They're called Mediterranean geckos. As you might guess from the name, they're not native to Texas. They're native to the Mediterranean region. And they're really cool species. They're the really pale geckos you see climbing around on the walls outside of your house at night next to the lights, picking off little moths and things attracted to the lights.
Why at night?
Geckos in general are kind of adapted for the night. They're nocturnal, most of them.
Okay.
And so they've got really big eyes. They got all kinds of really cool adaptations for living at night. And they've got some of the best eyes of any vertebrate. In fact, they're the only vertebrate known that can see color at night. That's how good their eyes are.
Cool. Cool. Do they need light in order to change color? Like physically?
Not this species. That's a good question about whether or not they can kind of meter their color change by the presence of. We don't really know that for other species like chameleons and things. These guys do tend to change colors like a little bit. Get darker and paler. But I'm not sure if it relies on light. But they're attracted to light mostly because the bugs that they want to eat are attracted to the light. They would eat bugs anywhere if there were plenty of bugs. But they're really unique, like you were suggesting, in that it's an all-female species. And they reproduce by this process called parthenogenesis, which essentially, if we break that word down, that word basically means virgin birth. They're not really born they hatch out of an egg. And when they hatch out of an egg, the little baby gecko is a female, and she is a genetic clone of her mother. So there are no males in the population. You could catch every gecko in Alpine and look under all their skirts, and you'd never find a male. And that's your first clue that something like this is happening. If you find a wildlife population where there's no males, there may be something like this going on. And this isn't even the only lizard in our area that does this. So we're not really sure with this species exactly how this happened. Surely somewhere in their evolutionary history, there was a parental population that did have males. And so I'm not sure if there was any kind of war against males that went on where females squeezed them out. It was probably some sort of a mutation involving meiosis. Through a trick of meiosis, and if you guys remember your junior high biology, that's just the process of making an egg where half the number of chromosomes are present in the egg and half the number of chromosomes are present in the sperm, so that when they get together, they make you a full-fledged individual with the correct chromosome count. Mm-hmm. A trick of meiosis where the female, instead of reducing the number of her chromosomes down to half, she just partitions her own chromosomes into those eggs, and it works. And then she lays an egg that's herself. And that gives you some real big advantages if you're a lizard. First of all, if you arrive on a new island in the Mediterranean, you only need one individual gecko to start a new population. You don't need to find a male. One. The female who gets there can start laying eggs, and she doesn't need males. So this is how this became a very successful strategy, specifically in this species. It colonized all the islands of the Mediterranean. And they also do really well.
Hold on.
Yeah.
So you're telling me a single gecko could go on the shell, like the shell of a tortoise.
Well,
and
they
float across the sea.
Yeah, sure. They get there on rafts of like old logs, on things like that. They've been doing it for thousands of years, and they've been probably following people through the Mediterranean doing this too. They do well near human habitations, as you know. And so they've just done super well. There's other geckos in the Pacific that do the same thing. And they've spread throughout all the far-flung Pacific islands. And then the Mediterranean gecko has taken it one step further, and it now is hopping from one city to the next in the United States. And I actually know how they got to Alpine. It's pretty hilarious. The herpetologist that used to be at Sol Ross, James Scuddy, had a friend who lived in College Station, and there were already geckos there, and his friend brought geckos to Alpine and let them go in James Scuddy's backyard as a joke. And that's how they got to Alpine.
Wow. It was a practical joke.
It was a practical joke, and it worked, and that's how they got here. And that's actually one of two instances where I'm certain that a herpetologist got a population of Mediterranean geckos started. That was James Scuddy in Alpine, and then Bob Mount in Auburn, Alabama, at Auburn University, did the same thing.
Do we know if this had a big impact on the food web here? It seems. Trying to think of there's not really anything that fits that niche of. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, they do well, and they mostly stick to human habitations. So they're not like an invasive species. I kind of like them because they don't get out into the wild. We have native geckos in West Texas that are not parthenogenic. They're male, female. They're really cool. They're totally different. No one ever sees them. They're a lot, and those are the ones that kind of live out in the wild, out in the desert, and they don't compete with the Mediterranean geckos. So it's kind of all good. Yeah.
Well, you're telling me that they are really adaptive to humans. So they have to have humans around.
Pretty much, yeah. It's hard to imagine a place in North America where Mediterranean geckos would have been able to take off without human habitations. They're super adapted to it. Like if you were to go on vacation to the Greek islands or to, see the Greek ruins, you would see these things all over the place there at night. They've probably been hanging out with humans since the Greek civilization.
Wow.
Or before. And so they're really attuned to it. And so, maybe there could have been some kind of rocky outcrop somewhere where the conditions would have been good enough for them to take hold. But really the reason why they're here is because they do real well in suburban habitats.
Interesting. So, all right. So we know now kind of why, these geckos have deleted the male population out of existence, right? No more male geckos of that particular genre. What would you call them? Genera?
That one species. And then, there's a bunch of other species out there that they're not the only parthenogenic lizards, and there's parthenogenic fish, parthenogenic salamanders. It's I wouldn't say it's super common, but it's certainly, there's a lot of good examples of it. And there's no good examples of it in birds or mammals. It doesn't happen.
All right. So we have talked about these lizards that have deleted the male population out of their species. Go feminism. First off,
I'd be worried if our human females had this ability. I think there have been several occasions where my wife might have used that.
Deleted you out of existence?
You're deleted.
You're deleted. Well, here's the thing, though. How does other species kind of mutate in their own ways? Because we're talking about transgender, hermaphrodite type. This is real science.
It is, yeah. And this, we could easily get in trouble here, depending on who is listening. I've talked about this in my classes, and when you talk about transgender and it gets into politics, and you quickly start getting in trouble, and you can get in trouble from both sides of the political spectrum talking about this.
Sure.
And we probably will. Especially because we're not supposed to be talking about this because we're not transgender. So the only people who have anything to say about this, some people would say, are people who are transgender. And I disagree with that, but we're going to get in trouble. We might as well, but we're going to delve into it, and there is science to it. And we'll try to talk about.
But we can all agree, everybody, regardless of who you are, what your creed is, what your gender is, we can all agree that science does exist, right?
Science does exist.
That's debatable.
Okay. All right,
Conley.
Oh, God. Okay, all right.
That's your opinion.
Well, that's what science is, I guess. Your opinion, right?
No, this is all what we're talking about is all scientifically based. I mean, it's biology, right?
Yeah.
You can observe these differences and these changes and document them. It's not like we're making something up or forming an opinion on anything. We're not talking about.
I'll give you an example of how quickly this can go sideways. It's like, there's sex chromosomes. That's how sex is determined in mammals and humans. XXXY. You're
before
50-50 chance. It's at basically at conception. When the two sex chromosomes meet, one from mom, one from dad. If your dad gave you the X or the X, and your mom gave you her X because she's only got two X's, that's their only possibility. You're a female. And if dad gives you his Y and mom gives you her X, you're XY. You're male. And then some people will jump all over that, and with complete scientific, confirmability, they'll say, see, there you go. There's only two sexes. So all these transgender, intersex people, they're all lying. Right? And that's not quite the truth. So the XY chromosome sets up a cascade of events which will lead to the differentiation of a fully phenotypic male. And a bunch of things phenotypic, sorry. Like the male form. The male form. Right?
Like so the bone marrow, structure,
everything.
Okay.
And the genotype is just which chromosomes you have. And then ultimately, though, the form that comes from those genes on the chromosomes, there's a huge number of steps involved, and it's not really complete until you've reached puberty. And a lot of things can go I'm not going to say they go wrong, because you can get in trouble if you say it's an abnormality. But, these steps have to be completed perfectly for a fully formed male. And if one little thing goes wrong along the way, you can end up with ambiguous genitalia. You can end up with a feminized male brain, right? One of the last things that gets differentiated is your actual brain and behavior. And so that's super complicated. And then you get these social and cultural feedbacks, and it becomes a total nightmare. Mm-hmm. But, at birth, or not even at birth, way before birth, at conception, all humans the default sex is female. So if any of those steps go wrong on the way to differentiation of a male, you can always kind of back off and end up going down the trajectory to become female. So you can have a situation where, the really important gene on the Y chromosome that starts that cascade, that's the first step that can kind of go wrong. That gene, the SRY gene that kind of starts the testosterone levels in the developing embryo and starts organizing all the tissues and the testis and all that. If that never kicks in, you can be XY, and you'll end up being a completely formed female. And
so it's not black and white,
know it.
Like people think. It's not really black and white. It's really more complicated.
It's all about hormones, right?
It's huge. Hormones are a huge part of it. And it starts when you're a fetus, and it doesn't really finish until you're 13, 14. And here's where I'll get in trouble with the other side, because, all these steps involved has been described as a spectrum. And that's not really true either, because 99% of people end up completely phenotypically female or male. The number of people who end up as intersex, it's a very low percentage. And so you wouldn't call that a spectrum. A spectrum indicates that there's all these ranges of possibilities that are kind of equally, plausible, and that's not true. And we shouldn't, that doesn't mean we should pick on these people. It doesn't mean we should not believe that they're, their stories. We should have empathy, and we should respect their right to live. But saying that it's a spectrum is just kind of it's glossing over the complicated nature of this, and that most people are born male, female, and go on to become differentiated, and these little steps involved go perfectly almost every single time. And it doesn't go perfectly less than 1% of the time. So these people will always be minorities. It's not like we can go and you wouldn't want to go and manipulate fetuses to get an even count across the population, right? That no one's saying that, but that's the kind of thing that, if you talk about it as a spectrum, you could almost expect that to be a logical outcome.
Yeah.
And that's just preposterous. It's like saying that we should be engineering people with 3 chromosomes across the board. Nobody's saying this. I'm just kind of, stretching that idea to its most ludicrous conclusion.
Yeah, well, we have about 2 minutes left, and the thing is, this whole thing really is complicated, and empathy is kind of the white horse, really, when you think about it.
Yeah, well, yeah. I think what people need to understand is that these differences, there's biology behind it.
Yeah,
I think a lot of people on one side of the aisle, they think this is all people are making decisions about this, to garner attention or something. But no, it's all about hormones. It's your biology.
Yeah,
it's hormones telling you,
and being true to yourself, right?
Yeah, and people should be free to do whatever they want.
Yeah, and I think that is probably the most conservative type outlook to it, if you really think about it.
Yeah, it's all about freedom. Like people should be able to behave, do what they want to. Everyone has a right to be happy or pursue happiness.
Well, be themselves, right?
Yeah.
Find themselves.
I think I read that somewhere on some old parchment document.
There's an old document.
Parchment?
Yeah. I think it was the back of a cereal box or something. Wheaties box.
I remember that. Cocoa Puffs.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back, and we're going to talk more about transitory states.
Hey, everyone. This is the Science Nights in the Morning, and we are talking about sex, gender. We're talking about hermaphrodites, natural variations in our configurations, transitory states. So what do we got now, Sean? What are we talking about next?
Yeah, I think you said a cool word that I think a lot of people get confused about: hermaphrodites, and that's a good one because, there's lots of folklore and urban legends about human hermaphrodites. Everybody's probably heard that Jamie Lee Curtis is a hermaphrodite.
Hermaphrodites, the goddess.
The goddess. And that's not true. There's no such thing as a human hermaphrodite. Let me explain. And then you'll probably understand why this has never happened. A hermaphrodite is a plant or animal that simultaneously or it can express or produce gametes of both sexes, so sperm and egg, right? And so in order to be a hermaphrodite, you need testis and ovaries. And there's never been a human being born with both functionally that function perfectly. You can have ambiguous genitalia, you can have all kinds of things, but no human being has ever had functional gonads of both sexes. Now, in plants, it's almost the rule. Like almost all plants are hermaphrodites. Like if you look at a flower, you're looking at some strange goings on. You're seeing those stamens with the pollen. That's the male part. You're seeing a pistil. You're seeing the female parts. And it's all on one flower. So a lot of plants are hermaphrodites, true hermaphrodites, and actually a lot of animals are too. But mostly invertebrates. Yeah. So things like corals, sponges, a lot of them are actually simultaneous hermaphrodites. They can produce sperm and egg at the same time. That doesn't necessarily mean they fertilize themselves, although some can. So sponges are a good example. They'll produce sperm and egg, and they'll broadcast the sperm out into the water column and fertilize some distant sponge. Meanwhile, some distant sponge is spraying its sperm out into the water, and if that sponge receives it, its eggs will be fertilized. And so this happens a lot in animals, mostly invertebrates, and it can happen even in vertebrates, but mostly just fish. So fish are the notorious, hermaphrodites among the vertebrates. The only other known example is a frog that can produce sperm and egg simultaneously. But a lot of fish can, and some of them can do it at the same time. But again, that doesn't indicate that they necessarily fertilize themselves. They just kind of take turns. One will, fertilize the egg of another, and then the other one will turn right around and fertilize the egg of the one that just mated with it the other way. So that's usually what happens. And then we got that would be what's called a simultaneous hermaphrodite. They're simultaneously producing sperm and egg. And then the really interesting, cool fish are what we call sequential hermaphrodites, which means they produce sperm and egg at some time in their lives, but not at the same time. That means that they change sex during their life.
So what process makes it to where is it a decision? Is it just part of their biology? Like what goes on here?
It's all part of their biology, and it all has to do, like when we talked about humans and we said that it's all these steps are involved in fully differentiating the sexes. It's all kind of genetically controlled, and there's a lot of hormones going on, and there's at the cellular level, there's little receptors for the hormones, and in modern mammals, pretty much all of that stuff is so far segregated across the sexes that there's just no going in between. But if you think about it, when I mentioned at fertilization, the embryo of a human has kind of tissue that can go either way. So if you were to give hormone treatment to a girl, she would actually develop male typical gonads, right? And you could do the same thing. You could reverse the sex of an embryonic male. Right? Yeah, you would have to keep it up, and it would be totally unethical, but you could do that. Now, in a sponge, that flexibility just is there genetically, and they are never committed to either sex, so they can be both.
They're just soaking it all up, huh?
So a really great movie scene is coming to mind. Sean, you might know what I'm leading at here. Jurassic Park. When they find, all the dinosaurs are supposed to be females. And Dr. Grant finds the raptor eggs. And he brings up, I think he says West African frogs or lizards or something are known to spontaneously change sex in
that's right.
certain environments. Is that true? Are there examples?
100% is, and this is actually one of the things that's straight out of the book. That's out of Michael Crichton. Michael Crichton deserves a ton of credit for that one, because at the time that he wrote that book, that was one of the most obscure papers in herpetology.
Wow!
It is now since been confirmed that this group of frogs, these reed frogs in Africa, are the only sex-changing vertebrates other than fish. But at the time of Jurassic Park, it was it wasn't very well founded. People kind of doubted it, but there was this obscure paper out there about, this frog last week was barking like a male, and this week it's under a male getting fertilized. So this thing changed sex. But man, yeah, Michael Crichton must have been really well read to have taken that little idea.
Or really high.
I doubt it. I think he was a pretty conservative cat.
Oh, okay, all right.
Yeah. Yeah,
drunk on scotch. Drunk on scotch.
Yeah.
Sure, maybe.
It's a conservative way to go.
Not the devil weed.
Yeah, devil lettuce.
Yeah, well, if you read that book, there's a lot of scientific basis to some of the stuff. There's a lot of stuff that's totally wacky, but you kind of have to sprinkle that in there to make it interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Crichton was a master of that, of like he would bury you with stuff that sounded plausible and then sneak in these little just preposterous things. And like, if you don't know exactly what's going on, you can easily, be fooled by
You can easily turn the page and read the next one.
Yeah.
Like every single page, you have to read it. There's no, like, I've never not read a Michael Crichton book in more than one setting. It's always been one setting. I can't not turn to the next page. So, that brings us into turning the page to, dinosaurs.
Yeah, we don't know much about that when it comes to dinosaurs. It's tricky in a lot of cases to distinguish male from female dinosaurs. All we have is their skeletal material in most cases. So, looking at things like behavior and their genetics is nearly impossible. So,
do you believe that dinosaurs can love?
No.
Come on.
There's no way.
They can love.
No.
I watched a documentary called Land Before Time.
Yeah, I mean, there's
an outside chance. If you define love as monogamy, there's an outside chance that there were monogamous dinosaurs.
Yeah, but they weren't like bringing each other flowers. Well, I mean, most of the time they were around, there were no flowers.
Like lettuce or whatever they pulled off.
Big old chunk.
Would they do that?
The big old chunk of a hadrosaur. No, I'm sure they did. There's when we look at the behavior of birds and crocodilians, their closest relatives, we do see that sort of behavior. So,
is there a dinosaur Valentine's Day?
Sure. Yeah, we have cave paintings. The cavemen.
Yeah,
painting depictions of mommy T-Rex getting chocolates from daddy T-Rex. It's all hard science. It gets really technical though, so that's not really the place.
Okay, well good. All right, let's get back to our subject here. Sean.
Yeah, let me talk about sex-changing fish. You guys want to hear about that?
Yeah. Let me, please. So God.
Yeah, there's a bunch of different fish that can do it. It's a small proportion of the total number of fish species, but maybe 25, 30 different species, mostly reef fish. The most famous one is the clownfish. So Finding Nemo. Nemo, famously, I forget, do you guys remember this movie? What's the plot? Is it his mom or his dad gets snatched for the pet trade in that movie?
Nemo basically runs from a shark, and there's Dory, which is the clownfish. Dory is the clownfish.
No, Nemo's a clownfish.
Nemo's a clownfish.
Nemo's a clownfish?
I don't know what Dory is.
What's Dory?
I don't think I don't know. Is a blue.
She a flounder?
Blue Molly or something?
Flounder. So I think if I recall, and one of our listeners, all four of you can call in and correct me. I think his mom gets snatched up, or is both his mom and his dad.
It's the dad.
Is it the dad?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so I think in that situation, had that really happened, I think if his mom had gotten snatched up, his dad would have changed sex into his mom. And then Nemo would have probably have become a dominant male and then mated with his own dad. So
I think that's fine. That's Finding Nemo too, I think.
Yeah, so that species, the clownfish does that. Their reproductive, their kind of mating strategy is that a big dominant female will hang out in one of those sea anemones, and there'll be a small little kind of cadre of the small males hanging out with her, and the most dominant of those small males will be mating with her. If she gets eaten or dies, the largest of those males will turn into a female and fill that role as the dominant female. And the same thing can happen the other way in other species, where it's a dominant male with a bunch of small individuals, and if you take that dominant male out of that little territory, one of the small subordinate females will start attacking all of her neighboring females until the hormones that kind of result from that aggressive behavior start changing her. And within a week, she becomes a dominant male, takes on the colors of the dominant male, and starts mating as a male with functional testes within a week.
Will she adapt to Switchblade?
She doesn't need a Switchblade, but she starts bruising the other females that are
really
in the harem. Yeah,
but she literally becomes a male.
Literally, and before this all happened, she was fully female. Like, she had ovaries, she was mating, she was laying eggs, and there's no male tissue present. There's tissue there that can become male tissue, but it's not a testis. And then within a week, they're little bitty yellow fish at that point when they're females. Within a week, she becomes this big blue-headed thing that's got functional testis, and the ovarian tissue has regressed and is going away.
What triggers this?
In most of these fish, it's the social environment that kicks off that chain of events.
So we can relate that to today, right?
Exactly. It's one of the main reasons why people study this. People are like, why would you study such a weird, bizarre curiosity in biology? It's like, well, hormones and behavior happen to work in very interesting ways within a social context in another species you're familiar with, that being yours, the humans. Mm-hmm. So it's really interesting to see this kind of thing where social feedback can initiate these cascades of events and really influence what's going on in these fish. And it's a really, when I was a master's student, my major professor worked on sex-changing fish, so I got to learn all about it, work on these small species that he was involved with. It was really cool stuff.
I bet you there have been a lot of whoopsies, people buying clownfish and throwing them in a aquarium thinking they're both male or something.
Yeah.
Come back in a week and got a dozen little clownfishes.
Yeah, it would be hard, especially in that in some of these other species, there's big time color changes that occur, so it's a lot easier to study. In the clownfish, the sexes are pretty similar, so you kind of have to go by size. And in a lot of these, they're using destructive sampling. If you're wondering how the hell they even do these kind of experiments back home, you have to go in there and dissect these guys in order to see that the tissue has changed. And they do all kinds of really high-tech kind of genetic studies on exactly how the tissue changes under hormone treatment and really cool stuff like that. It's really involved, but a lot of it does involve, like, humane sacrifice of the animals in order to figure all this stuff out.
Well, I mean, it helps us figure out more about how we work, right? Our own clockwork.
Yes, it's really cool.
Cool.
And yeah, I think it gives people a different kind of perspective, because again, there's this tendency for some people to say, well, biology says it's just X, Y, X, X. It's not complicated. So what's all this about?
Right, the black and white approach, as many people
And it's
say.
like, well, now if you read your endocrinology textbook, you'll find it's a wee bit more complicated.
As is a lot of things. And you know what? Hey, we are going to be back after the break, and we're going to wrap this whole thing up. We're going to figure it out. We're going to make it black and white. Okay?
We are. I think we need to tackle the issue of sports.
Let's do it.
Hey, everybody. Sean Graham here. We're the Science Nights in the morning, and we're talking about all kinds of interesting biological sex characteristics and things like sex-changing fish, hermaphrodites that can fertilize themselves and those that can't. Really interesting. And, again, where this becomes controversial is anytime, we've been pretty safe on this show so far. We've been talking mostly about animal examples, and you can get away with that. You start talking about humans, and it can become quickly political, and you can get yourself in trouble with both sides of the political spectrum. And that's why we're going to go just wade right into this, because we're going to talk about sports. And I'm here to tell you, I can tell you right now, one of the most unfair sports problems that we have. And it's all about, it's not what you think. It's softball, people. Softball. You know what I'm talking about? What? Who plays softball?
Women and your office intramural team.
Your office pool, yeah. So I think softball is the most sexist, condescending, patronizing sport of all time, and it needs to be outlawed. If softball was outlawed and women grew up playing baseball, I have no doubt that there would be a female Major League Baseball pitcher by now. No doubt. So that's that. I'm getting off my soapbox now. You guys can talk about.
Is it the way they pitch, like the way the arm moves,
everything, the mechanics of it? It's all because it's like supposed to be safer, and they grow up playing it because it's for girls, and we should get rid of it. If they're playing baseball, because they absolutely can play baseball, and they don't need to have a softball so they don't get hurt. If they grew up throwing overhand, have you seen some of these pitchers and they're throwing underhand? They're crushing it.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
they're really good.
I played Little League with a couple of girls. One of them beat up my coach's son in the dugout.
I got beat up by a girl once. It's awesome. I'll never forget it.
They're way ahead of us.
Yeah, they are. They really are.
Yeah. So that's I'm not going to talk about anything else involving sports.
Well, what about bone marrow? Is like bone marrow thing is like, when.
Tell me what you mean.
Well, I'm talking about, okay, if someone were to transition and wanted to weightlift, as an example. Okay.
Are you talking about like bone density, testosterone, muscle mass?
Testosterone, all of that.
Yeah, it's all totally different. And that's why,
That's why it's controversial right now,
yeah,
you think?
It's getting controversial, and, you can be canceled for even talking about the science of it. But I'll say this. If you really want to encourage and allow everybody to play sports, one way to do it is to integrate it across the board.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And nobody's talking about that.
Well, but do you think
there's a reason for that?
Don't you think that there's a physical balance?
What do you mean?
I mean, I'm talking about like, how many people are 6 foot plus versus 5 foot.
The advantages that a lifetime of testosterone gives a male is obvious. And if you don't buy that, if you think that, gender is just a complete construct socially and there's nothing to do with biology, then see what happens if you integrate all sports. And just let males and females battle it out and see who's best. There would be some sports
but best
where women
is
would be able to compete.
That's the problem is best, like, because, I don't care who wins at baseball or football. Like, I care about who brings about science and who betters this world as like, and a lot of that is women. And a lot of that, it's not like based on a physical difference.
I see what you mean. Yeah. You could easily make the argument that we shouldn't be so obsessed about this.
Yeah.
People shouldn't care what happens in sports because it's just a bunch of grown adults playing with a ball.
Right.
Right. Yeah. They could be working in the chemistry lab trying to, cure cancer or something like that.
Yeah.
And we're the cheerleaders for that activity. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I know what you mean. And in a certain way, I'm like, why does everybody's so obsessed with this? They care so much. But, let's grant them the idea that sports are cool and they're fun and that they're important to a lot of people. That's true.
Is it sports or is it competitiveness? Because where in our biology Like, honestly, like
that's our primitive ape brain.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Exactly.
We want,
there's a competitive nature that we all have, right?
We want to see it happen. We want to see.
You can make it,
violence.
You can make the argument that if people weren't out there beating themselves to a pulp playing football, they'd be doing it for real. It's like a ritualized warfare. Is what it is.
Oh, yeah, exactly what it is. Yeah.
Hey, so, I've got a question here for you, Sean, that probably requires more than whatever 5 minutes we have left. 3 minutes, even better. Since we've been talking about hormones and how they affect sex and all of that, do you have any take on this idea that say hormones in cow's milk, or the way that plastics affect hormone production?
Because
that seems like a hot topic right now.
Yeah, environmental estrogens, often people call it, or endocrine disrupting compounds. So the endocrine system is the part of your body that runs the hormones, and there are chemicals in the environment that we're making that interfere and influence those.
I think they're called phthalate. It's like phthalates or something.
Phthalates?
The plastic.
Yeah, there's a bunch of different kinds. Some are derived from plastic. Others derived from like pesticides. DDT was a big one. And yeah, they've tied it perfectly. Like DDT was a bad one. I always joke around with my students. When they were using DDT, they didn't stop using it until like the late 70s, around the time I was born. And I actually dug up a paper where they were talking about DDT being linked to feminization of human babies in the Atlanta area in 1977. And I was like, oh, that explains why I'm such a girly boy. I always have been. Terrible at sports, terrible at all that kind of stuff. But yeah, it lowers sperm counts. There's a lot of evidence of that. I can imagine,
it shrinks testicles too. Like, right.
That's right. Yeah. That's the kind of, the big feminization part would be, to a male embryo, if that stuff gets all the way into, the milk or the developing mother, it would happen, to the fetus and potentially have long-ranging effects. And so that is something people should be concerned about. And it's one of these things that it could accumulate over time before we'd ever see any real big impacts, like a children of men situation where males suddenly become sterile. It's just not going to happen overnight. But, if you have sterility problems, that kind of thing, that could be what's going on, or it would be really hard to know. Like, you're not going to be able to go to your doctor and get some test that says, yep, you were exposed to this kind of plastic when you were an infant or a fetus. So that's why this is. It's just going to be this kind of thing that drags. But it's just one of those issues that, we should all be concerned about, the kind of chemicals that we're putting out in our environment. And,
microchemicals too, right?
Yeah. The appropriate regulations probably need to be put in place, because I doubt that the industry is going to do this themselves. So yeah, it's something to be concerned about. It's a good way to end it, I guess, this terrifying process.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I will say, Sean, like when it comes to interior design, you are tier 1, my friend. So. All right.
Yeah, there are benefits.
There are a lot of benefits to it. So anyway,
this has been the last episode of the Science Nights in the Morning. It's been a good run, guys.
We'll see you on the other side of cancellation, everybody.
We'll see you on next week.
Be cool to each other, people.
Yeah. Hey, we're all one in this world, right?
No, we're individuals. We're unique individuals. So
we're all unique, and that's what makes the world very unique, right?
Be cool.
Be cool. Be cool. Be cool. Thanks for listening to this episode of Science Nights in the Morning. Be sure and follow us on Patreon for exclusive gear and uncut episodes. Check out the latest science articles on our Facebook page and subscribe to us on YouTube and your favorite podcast listening app. You can also listen every Saturday at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time at BigBenRadio.com. And if you got a question, we'll join the discussion. Hit the hotline at 432-217-1983 and record your message. We couldn't do this without you, and thank you so much for listening each and every week. That's Science Nights in the Morning with a K, and we'll see you next time.